Welcome to Dune Chapter by Chapter. I'm Dominic. So in the last chapter, what happened was Paul and Jessica were caught in a storm in the tent, and then they realized that they couldn't no longer stay there because Duncan, Idaho, told Paul that, well, if I get tortured, this is how long I can hold out before I give up your location. So this is how much time you have before you have to move on. And then the chapter kind of ended with Paul having to come to terms with all the knowledge that he had because his mind was opened up, and coming to terms with the realization that his mother is the daughter of the Baron Harkonnen, which makes him the grandson. So he is actually a Harkonnen. So Harkonnen will kill Harkonnen, as he said in that chapter. Kind of ended up with them leaving, and they could see off in the distance all these different lights in a outcropping of rock across like the desert sands. And you can see it's the Harkonnens doing all these sweeps with las guns in Thufir, trying to kill everything in sight. So that's where that one ended off. Now, this chapter picks up kind of like with a new scene. And in this one, we learn the fate of Thufir Hawat and the few remaining Atreides soldiers that was with him. And there were some of the guys that almost got sealed off in the caves as they retreated from the Harkonnen attack. Now, in this chapter, we start to learn how big this force was that actually invaded Arrakis or invaded Arrakeen and attacked House Atreides. And it was a huge force. It was like legions of soldiers. And so I was kind of curious how many guys there are in a legion, how many soldiers make up a legion. And the number I got when I looked it up was 6,000. And there were like multiple legions landing here and there, and all kinds of ships. So they said, so Thufir Hawat comes to the realization that, well, this would be like years and years worth of spice just to pay for this attack. So, there's vast amounts of wealth behind this. And then he says to himself, well, I completely underestimated how far the Baron would go to destroy House Atreides, that he would spend this much money. And not only that, but they have the bank accounts of the Emperor as well. And knowing that with this magnitude of force to crush House Atreides, he comes to the realization that there's no way they're ever going to be able to prove that in front of the Council of the Landsraad, the Council of all the noble houses. So, I mean, it was a huge, huge force. And Thufir Hawat wasn't at the main city of Arrakeen when the attack went down. He just got reports coming in, and so that's how he was able to get away. And now the other thing in this that's interesting is Thufir Hawat is still convinced Lady Jessica is the traitor, and he wants to get his vengeance on her. He can't. It's just burning him that he got outwitted by the traitor, and he's like having having doubts about his own mentat capability, because this was able to get by him and he couldn't see it. There's all these things that got past him. He underestimated the Baron. He couldn't stop the traitor in time. And then in the chapter it describes that one of the bad things about being a mentat is you're just overanalyzing all the information, all your thoughts. So now he's just left pondering of what happened. Now he's trying to make plans. Well, I gotta get revenge. I gotta get revenge on the Duke. I gotta find Lady Jessica, and I gotta destroy her, because he's still convinced. He doesn't know that it was actually Dr. Yue was the traitor. Now they're in some outcropping of rock. They're in kind of like a little cave type area inside of some rocks and stuff here with these Fremen. And so Thufir Hawat's there, and he's got some of the Atreides soldiers with him, and some of them are wounded. And so he's trying to join forces with the Fremen. But in this chapter, there's like a clash of two different cultures coming together here, and the misunderstanding that these two cultures have, because their customs are so different, it could actually turn deadly, and it has some intense moments. So the misunderstanding comes with they don't understand the customs of how the Fremen treat the wounded and the dead. And it's quite different from what the Atreides do, or anyone would do. And because you have to remember the customs of everything about the Fremen, their customs and their culture, and all that is all built around the environment of Arrakis. It's all formed about scarcity of water, the harsh desert conditions, everything. That's the basis of their culture. So that dictates everything within their culture. So Thufir Hawat's asking him, we have wounded soldiers here, we have men here. Can you help our wounded? And then he just keeps, and the Fremen guy doesn't get it. He said, well, aren't the wounded responsible for themselves? Don't they know what's best for the tribe? Can't they make that decision and do what's best for your tribe? And Thufir Hawat knows he's not getting it. He's like, there's some kind of thing they're not connecting on a certain level. And then Thufir Hawat's getting really frustrated. What Thufir doesn't realize, what they don't really, and they don't come out, and Frank Herbert doesn't come out and say it in the chapter, but in Fremen culture, if you got guys that are really wounded, and then they got to make a choice, okay, you're wounded, can we help you, or how wounded are you? Because if you're really wounded, well, maybe it's time for you to die, and then you can give up your water for the good of the whole tribe. So it comes off very brutal and very cold to outsiders, but these are the lengths you have to go to survive on Arrakis. So that's where the miscommunication is coming from. And so they're trying to seek help, and they're just not connecting at all. And then the other thing, you start to realize just how formidable of a fighting force the Fremen are in this chapter, because they describe the attack with the artillery guns that the Harkonnens used, and how they used it to seal in Atreides' men who retreated into caves, into the mountains and stuff. And the Fremen were actually able to capture one of these artillery guns, one of the big ones. That's all the description Frank Herbert gives in the book. He just says one big gun, right? So that's could be anything, right? It's lots left up to the imagination there. And they're now taking apart and kind of reverse engineering it under Liet's orders in this chapter. And so then Thufir Hawat dawns on him, well, all these huge guns were all operated and guarded by Sardaukar. And the Sardaukar are the most feared fighting force in the Empire. They're the Emperor's own personal army. And so then they ask, then they start to wonder, how did you engage the Sardaukar? And then the Fremen says, oh yeah, they could fight really well. And then they talk about how they engaged a bunch of Harkonnen soldiers and a bunch of Sardaukar soldiers. And they said, well, only 2 of our guys died, but we killed a bunch of them. But the Sardaukar were formidable. And we were actually able to capture 3 Sardaukar, and they're right now being interrogated. And so this blows the Atreides soldiers' minds. Like, what? These guys were, not only could they defeat Sardaukar and kill a bunch of them, they were actually able to capture 3 of them. This is because the Sardaukar they're such like a formidable army. And so then Thufir Hawat has the realization, like, holy, if only we could have joined forces with these guys sooner, before this attack landed, and trained them to use our weapons and stuff, what they would have been like this unstoppable fighting force, like way more formidable than the Sardaukar, way more feared than the Sardaukar. Because the whole thing in this book is Seleucia Secundus is a really harsh planet like Arrakis, and has a really harsh environment. And this is where the Sardaukar train, and this is why they are such an elite fighting force, is because of the living conditions on Seleucia Secundus. And but the only other planet that is way more harsh than that is the planet Arrakis. So the environment that the Fremen came up makes them even a more tougher people, because it's a much harsher environment than the planet that the Sardaukar come from. And that was kind of like going with Frank Herbert's themes, that the environment, the more, the softer the environment, or the more cushy the environment, the people brought up in that environment, they're going to be weaker. The more harsher the environment, the harder it is to survive in an environment. It's going to force the people to become stronger. That was his theory, or his idea, right? And so that's how it's kind of explored in the book, between the forces of the Sardaukar and the Fremen. So they're trying to get around this misunderstanding, and then they want to make a water bond, and Thufir starts to figure, okay, we got to somehow make a bond with these people, a water bond. And then one of their guys die. And one of the Atreides that was wounded, the men tell him, okay, well, he dies. And then so anyway, the Fremen asks, well, what are you going to do with his body? His remains are his remains, but his water should go to the whole tribe. So finally it clicks in, and with Thufir, and so he allows the Fremen, okay, you guys can have the body, which, and the men don't really like that, the Atreides men, because in their culture, when someone dies, you can't desecrate their body, you got to honor it. A lot like modern society now, right? You either have them cremated or buried, and but they're basically going to take him away and do whatever they do and take all the water out of his body and give it to the tribe. So the men there's a tense moment where the guards with the Atreides, they don't want this to happen, and one of them actually starts to pull a lasgun out, and then Thufir Hawat shouts him down to stop. We can't, this is their customs. They'll respect the dead just as much as they'll treat our Atreides guy like they treat their own. They have just as much respect for the dead as we do, but it's just a different way. So then he talks the guy down. Now we actually get like a battle scene in this chapter, because all of a sudden a group of Sardaukar are marching along the sand, and then proceeded to be behind them is an Atreides Thufir with the Harkonnen battle colors splashed on it. And so anyway, then they engage the Fremen, but the Fremen were already there, like hiding in the sand, and so they pop up and they surround the Sardaukar, and then it's just described there's this big cloud of dust. The Sardaukar even have personal body shields, and the Fremen just kind of think that's like a joke. They just laugh about it, like, they're using those stupid shields again, and then they wipe them all out, despite even despite the fact they had personal shields. The Fremen didn't. The Fremen are actually able to capture the Atreides Thufir. Then what happens after that? A larger Thufir arrives with a bunch of Harkonnen, or a bunch of Sardaukar soldiers on it, a lot more soldiers. And so then Thufir Hawat gets to see how far the Fremen will go to win a fight. And so the Fremen that took the Thufir in the first skirmish, then just as this big troop carrier, basically what it is, or troop transport Thufir, starts to land, and they're firing off their las guns and stuff, so they can't activate their shields. So then the Fremen with their stolen Thufir just nosedive right into it and destroy both of them, sacrificing themselves. Then like Thufir Hawat's blown away, like, holy cow, like these guys are not messing around. So they just wiped out all those guys. But then what's cool is it seems like the battle's over. They've won against the Sardaukar, but then over the rock face coming down onto the desert sand, they see a big army of Sardaukar guys coming down to the sand, and they're like slowly falling. They're coming off of the rock face, but slowly falling down to the ground, and they're all armed with swords and stuff, and knives. And then one of them throws a knife and actually gets the Fremen guy in through the throat and kills him. And then what's cool about that was, when I read it, is that scene's actually in the movie trailer for the new film coming out. So this is a scene that's going to be in the film, because that's a scene you saw, all the Sardaukar guys slowly floating down and landing on the desert on the sand floor there. That was in the trailer, and that's the image I used for the thumbnail for this video as well. So that tells me that, well, this scene that's in this chapter where Thufir Hawat's confronting these guys, and then the Sardaukar show up and then they have a big battle, that's going to be in the movie, because we saw one of the scenes from this chapter is actually in that trailer. So I thought that was really cool. And so then the chapter kind of ends with, the Fremen are overtaken, and so that we're in this rock face, and now we assume Thufir Hawat is probably going to be captured by the Sardaukar. And so that's where the chapter ends. But this is a pretty good chapter. I like this chapter, and we really get to see, how the Fremen fight, and we get to see more action from the Sardaukar. And what's good about this chapter is Dune is written in a way, now modern books wouldn't be written like this. Like a lot of modern books, they always show the action. But Frank Herbert does this weird thing where sometimes he'll completely skip over the action, and you'll just hear about it in people talking bits and pieces about it afterwards. So there's a lot of things people take for granted when you see a lot of the adaptations for Dune on film and TV and stuff. They show all those battles, but in the book they don't. A lot of times Frank Herbert just skips over it, like the Battle of Arakeen at the spoiler warning, the Battle of Arakeen at the end of the book. In all the movies, they actually show that battle. Frank Herbert just skips right over that battle and then just hear about the aftermath of that battle. And the same thing with the initial invasion of the city of Arakeen by the Sardaukar and the Harkonnens. He doesn't really show any of the battle. It's just all about Duke Leto getting, betrayed by Dr. Yueh and all that, and then he kind of realizes the house shields are down, but it doesn't go into any description, doesn't show the battle, and you're just hearing about it, about that battle in bits and pieces from the other characters after the fact. So that's what's cool about this chapter is it's actually a chapter has actual, like, some battle in it, some actual battle that you actually get to see it. Like if it was a movie, you would see it, right, in action. You get to see an actual battle in the book. So that's what's cool about this chapter. And so another really good chapter. And so curious to see what's going to happen in the next one. So that's everything I got to say in this video. Let me know what you think in the comments section, and I will see you at the next one.